The gunshot echoed across the Montana plains, fading into the vastness of the early morning sky. Grace Jennings lowered the smoking revolver, her trembling hands betraying the calm expression she fought to maintain. The rattlesnake lay dead at her feet, its scaled body still twitching in the dirt beside the freshly marked grave of her husband. 6 months, a widow, and the threats of the wild frontier seemed to multiply with each passing day. April 1877 had brought more challenges than Grace could have anticipated when she and Robert had first journeyed west from Boston 3 years earlier. The promise of land and prosperity had quickly given way to the harsh realities of frontier life: drought, illness, and now solitude. Grace tucked the revolver into the pocket of her skirt and cast one final glance at Robert's grave. "I'll make it work," she whispered, though the doubt in her voice betrayed her words. The small ranch they'd built together now rested solely on her shoulders, a weight nearly impossible to bear alone. The morning sun climbed higher as Grace made her way back to the modest cabin that sat nestled against a backdrop of pine trees. Their dream had been simple: build a cattle ranch, raise a family, and create something lasting. Now, at 26, Grace found herself with a struggling ranch, mounting debts, and not a soul to help her manage it all. Inside the cabin, Grace removed her shawl and sank into a chair at the small wooden table. Papers were scattered before her: bank notices, cattle records, and a final warning from the land office. 3 months. She had 3 months to make good on their loans or lose everything. A knock at the door startled her. Visitors were rare out this far and rarely brought good news. Grace reached for her revolver before approaching the door. "Who's there?" she called, her voice stronger than she felt. "Isaiah Walker, madam. I'm looking for work." Grace hesitated before opening the door just enough to see the man standing on her porch. Tall and weathered, with dark hair and eyes that had seen much of the world's harshness. His clothes were dusty from travel, but well maintained. A cowboy by the look of him. "I'm not hiring," Grace said flatly. "Lost half my herd to sickness last winter. Can barely feed myself, let alone pay wages." The man, Isaiah, removed his hat and held it respectfully against his chest. "I heard in town that the Jennings ranch might need help. I'm not asking for much, madam, just fair work for fair board." "You heard wrong. This isn't the Jennings ranch anymore." "It's just me now." Grace began to close the door. "Begging your pardon," Isaiah said quickly, "but from what I could see riding in, you've got at least 30 head that need moving to better grazing before summer heat sets in. Fencing on the north side that won't last another storm. And with all due respect, madam, you look like you haven't slept proper in weeks." Grace stiffened. "You've been watching my property." "No, madam, just observing what any experienced rancher would see." He shifted his weight. "I worked 5 years for the Bowman spread in Wyoming. Foreman for 3 of those years before Mr. Bowman's sons took over. I can provide references." Grace studied him more carefully. His hands bore the calluses of honest work. His eyes, while direct, held no malice. Still, she'd learned the hard way that kindness could be feigned. "Even if I wanted help, Mr. Walker, I couldn't pay you. Like I said, room and board is fair enough until you get back on your feet." He gestured to the open land. "Might be I could help you turn things around. Either way, come fall, I'll be on my way if that's what you prefer." Grace considered the mountains of work awaiting her, the cattle that needed tending, the repairs she couldn't manage alone, the crushing weight of it all. "One moment," she said, closing the door. She leaned against it, heart pounding. Taking on a stranger was risky, but facing the coming months alone seemed impossible. After a deep breath, she reopened the door. "There's a bunkhouse behind the barn. It's not much, but it's yours if you want it. Meals are at sunrise and sunset." I expect work from sunup to sundown, and I won't tolerate drinking or trouble. Isaiah nodded. Yes, madam, that's more than fair. And Mr. Walker, I sleep with a loaded gun, don't give me reason to use it. A smile touched the corner of his mouth. Wouldn't dream of it, Mrs. Jennings. It's just Grace, she corrected. The word Mrs. a painful reminder of all she'd lost. Grace, then, he agreed with a respectful nod. I'll get my things settled and start on those fences before midday. True to his word, within an hour Isaiah had his few possessions stored in the small bunkhouse and was examining the northern fence line. Grace watched him from the kitchen window as she prepared a simple stew for the evening meal. There was something reassuring about his methodical movements, the confident way he handled tools and assessed the work ahead. By sunset, he had repaired a significant stretch of fence and moved a portion of the herd to fresher grazing land. When he arrived for supper, he removed his hat and washed his hands at the pump outside before entering small courtesies that Robert had always observed. They ate in relative silence, the awkwardness of strangers sharing a table hanging between them. Finally, Grace spoke. "You're not from around here." Isaiah shook his head. "No, madam, originally from Texas, moved north after the war. You fought?" "Yes, madam, Confederate cavalry, not something I'm proud of now, but I was young and foolish then." Grace appreciated his honesty. "My husband was Union, infantry." Isaiah nodded, continuing to eat. "War's long over. Most men who survived it just want to live in peace now." "Is that what you want, Mr. Walker? Peace?" He considered the question. "I want honest work and a sky over my head. The rest tends to sort itself out." After dinner, Isaiah excused himself to check on the horses before retiring. Grace watched from the porch as his tall figure moved through the gathering darkness toward the barn. For the first time in months, she felt the smallest measure of relief. One day of help had already made a difference. As days turned into weeks, a rhythm developed between them. Isaiah rose before dawn, tended to the most pressing work, and proved himself not only capable but invaluable. The herd began to look healthier under his care. The fences and outbuildings were repaired one by one. He even fixed the roof of the cabin that had leaked all through spring. Grace found herself sleeping more soundly, knowing someone else was watching over the property. The dark circles beneath her eyes began to fade, and occasionally she caught herself humming as she worked something she hadn't done since Robert's passing. One evening in late May, as a thunderstorm rolled across the plains, Grace invited Isaiah to remain in the cabin rather than make the dash to the bunkhouse through pouring rain. "You can take the chair by the fire," she offered, pouring him a cup of coffee. "No sense in catching your death." Isaiah accepted gratefully, extending his hands toward the warmth of the flames. "Storm like this reminds me of my first cattle drive. 16 years old and convinced I knew everything there was to know about ranching." He chuckled. "Lightning spooked the herd, and we lost nearly a third of the cattle over a cliff. Trail boss nearly fired me on the spot." Grace smiled. "Robert, my husband, he'd never even seen a cow up close before we came west. He was a bookkeeper in Boston. Had grand ideas about ranching but didn't know a bull from a steer." The memory brought warmth rather than pain. He learned quickly, though, was determined to make this place work. He must have been a good man. He was. Grace stared into her coffee cup. "Pneumonia took him this past winter. Doctor from town couldn't get here in time." Isaiah nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you." Grace hesitated before adding, "I'm grateful for your help these past weeks. I was struggling." "Ranch this size is too much for one person," Isaiah said simply. "Man or woman." Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the roof. The repairs held not a single drop leaked through. The bank's given me until July to make good on our loans, Grace admitted. Before you came, I was sure I'd lose the place. Now, she shrugged. Maybe there's a chance. Isaiah set down his cup. Those yearlings we've been fattening up could fetch a decent price. Another month and they'll be ready for market. Between that and the wool from your small flock, you might just make that payment. Grace corrected softly. Between that and the wool, we might make that payment. Something shifted in Isaiah's eyes, a recognition of being valued, of belonging somewhere. He nodded once, and they finished their coffee in comfortable silence as the storm raged outside. The following weeks brought intense labor as they prepared for the drive to the nearest market town. Isaiah taught Grace how to properly round up cattle, techniques for moving them efficiently, and how to judge their market value. She proved a quick study, her determination making up for her lack of experience. Together, they mended the remaining fences, treated sick animals, and even managed to plant a small vegetable garden beside the cabin. Their days were filled with hard work, but for the first time since Robert's death, Grace felt hope taking root alongside the seedlings. One evening in mid-June, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Isaiah cleared his throat. "Grace, there's something I should tell you." The serious tone in his voice made her turn to look at him. "What is it? Before I came here, I was in some trouble in Billings." He kept his eyes on the distant horizon. "Nothing unlawful, I want to be clear on that. But I had disagreements with some powerful people, landowners who don't take kindly to being refused." "Refused what?" "They wanted to hire guns to drive out smaller ranchers, consolidate land. I wouldn't be part of it." His jaw tightened. "Made some enemies." "That's partly why I was looking for work out this way." Grace considered this information. "Are these enemies likely to come looking for you?" "Probably not this far, but I thought you should know. You've been honest with me. You deserve the same." Grace nodded, appreciating his candor. "This land has taught me that everyone carries something from their past, Isaiah. What matters is what you choose to do now." His shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you for understanding." As darkness fell, Grace found herself studying Isaiah's profile in the fading light. The lines of his face told stories of hardship and perseverance. His hands, strong and capable, had brought order back to her chaotic world. Something warm and unfamiliar stirred within her, something she hadn't expected to feel again. The day before they planned to drive the cattle to market, disaster struck. Grace discovered 3 cows dead near the creek, with more showing signs of illness. Isaiah examined them grimly. "Blackleg," he diagnosed. "We need to separate the sick ones immediately and burn the dead." They worked frantically through the day and into the night, isolating affected animals and treating those they could save. By morning, they had lost 7 head of cattle, a devastating blow to their plans. Grace sat on a fallen log near the creek, exhaustion etched in every line of her body. "We can't take them to market now, not until we're sure the disease is contained." Isaiah sat beside her, equally tired. "No, we can't risk spreading it. The bank won't wait, Isaiah. The payment's due in 2 weeks." He was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "I have some savings." "Not much, but no," Grace interrupted firmly. "This isn't your burden. It became my burden when I agreed to help." His voice was gentle but determined. "We'll figure something out. Maybe sell some of your husband's tools or furniture." Grace shook her head. "I've already sold anything of value. Robert's watch, my mother's silver. There's nothing left." The weight of defeat pressed down on her shoulders. After all their hard work, after beginning to believe they might succeed, this setback seemed insurmountable. Tears she'd held back for months threatened to spill. "I can't do this alone," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. Isaiah turned to her, his expression resolute. "Then you ain't alone no more." He reached out slowly and took her hand in his. The simple contact, warm, steady, and reassuring, broke something open inside Grace. The tears came freely then, months of grief and struggle pouring out as Isaiah sat silently beside her, his presence an anchor in the storm. When the tears finally subsided, Grace took a deep breath. "I'm sorry." "Nothing to be sorry for," he replied. "Crying don't make you weak, just makes you human." Grace managed a small smile. "What do we do now?" Isaiah squeezed her hand once before releasing it. "We adapt. Tomorrow I'll ride to the Campbell Ranch. They were looking to expand their herd last I heard. Might be willing to buy some of our healthy stock directly. That's 3 days' ride each way. Then I'd better get started at first light." He stood, offering his hand to help her up. "And while I'm gone, you write to that bank, ask for an extension. Tell them you've had sickness in the herd but you're working to resolve it. They've denied extensions twice already. Then make them see reason a third time." Isaiah's confidence was unwavering. "You're not giving up this land, Grace. I won't let that happen." True to his word, Isaiah departed at dawn, riding east toward the Campbell property with nothing but determination and a promise to return as quickly as possible. Grace watched until he disappeared from view, feeling strangely bereft in his absence. The days without him stretched long and lonely. Grace tended the sick cattle, rode to the bank as Isaiah had suggested, and tried not to count the hours until his return. She hadn't realized how accustomed she'd grown to his presence, the sound of his boots on the porch, his deep voice calling a greeting, the way he always seemed to anticipate what needed doing without being asked. On the 4th day, a visitor arrived. Not Isaiah, but Mr. Peterson from the bank, his wagon kicking up dust as it approached the cabin. Grace straightened her dress and hair before stepping onto the porch to meet him, her heart sinking at the unexpected visit. "Mrs. Jennings," he said, removing his hat, "I received your letter." "Mr. Peterson," Grace acknowledged, keeping her voice steady. "I wasn't expecting a personal response." The banker cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Given the circumstances and your history with our institution, I felt it warranted a visit rather than correspondence." "I see." Grace gestured to the porch chairs. "Would you care to sit? I can offer coffee." Once settled with cups of hot coffee, Peterson came to the point. "Mrs. Jennings, this is your 3rd request for an extension. The bank's board is concerned." "I understand their concern, but as I explained in my letter, we've had sickness in the herd. Once it's contained, we'll bring cattle to market." Peterson raised an eyebrow. Grace hesitated only briefly. "I've taken on help, a very experienced ranch hand." "I see." The banker sipped his coffee. "Nevertheless, your payment is due next week. Without it, I'm afraid foreclosure proceedings will begin. Mr. Peterson, my husband, and I never missed a payment until his death. Surely that counts for something. Business is business, Mrs. Jennings. The bank can't operate on sentimentality." Grace felt anger rising in her chest. "It's not sentimentality to recognize hard work and commitment. We've improved this land, increased its value. All we need is a little more time." "I'm sorry, but 3 more weeks," Grace interrupted. "Give me 3 more weeks. If I can't make payment by then, I won't contest the foreclosure." Peterson studied her, seeming to weigh her determination. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, 3 weeks, not a day more, but the interest will continue to accrue." "Thank you," Grace said, relief washing through her. After Peterson departed, Grace sank onto the porch steps, the temporary reprieve providing little comfort. Without Isaiah's return and success in his mission, even 3 more weeks wouldn't be enough. 2 more days passed with no sign of Isaiah. Grace found herself watching the horizon constantly, hoping to see the familiar figure of man and horse returning. On the seventh day, just as she was feeding the chickens, she spotted movement in the distance. Shielding her eyes against the sun, her heart leapt when she recognized Isaiah's broad-shouldered silhouette. But he wasn't alone. Following behind him was a string of horses, at least a dozen, and another rider. Grace set down the feed bucket and walked quickly toward the approaching party. As they drew closer, she could see Isaiah's face was drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes lit up when they met hers. "Grace," he called, dismounting with a wince that suggested saddle soreness. "I've brought help." The second rider, an older man with a silver-streaked beard, tipped his hat to Grace. "Campbell's the name, madam. Isaiah here tells me you've got a situation needs resolving." Isaiah made formal introductions. "Mr. Campbell has agreed to buy 8 head of our cattle, the healthy ones from the south pasture that weren't exposed, and he's brought horses to trade." "Horses?" Grace questioned. Campbell nodded. "Fine stock, madam, quarter horses with good bloodlines, less susceptible to blackleg than cattle. Could be the start of a new direction for your ranch." Grace looked from the horses to Isaiah, understanding dawning. Horse breeding instead of cattle ranching. "It's a thought," Isaiah said cautiously. "Less competition in these parts for quality horses. Army's always buying, and so are the stage lines." "Mr. Campbell," Grace said, turning to the older man, "would you mind watering your horses at the creek? I need a moment with my ranch hand." Once Campbell was out of earshot, Grace stepped closer to Isaiah. "You rode all that way and convinced him not only to buy our cattle but to trade horses." Isaiah shrugged, a small smile playing at his lips. "Turns out I knew his brother years back. Pulled him out of a river during the spring thaw of '69. Family honor means something to the Campbells. Even so, this is remarkable." "Will it be enough for the bank?" Grace nodded. "I convinced Peterson to give us 3 more weeks. Between the cattle sale and what we could get for a few horses once they're trained, we should make the payment with a little to spare." Relief washed over Isaiah's face. "That's good news." "The best news," Grace agreed softly, "is that you came back." Something vulnerable flickered in Isaiah's eyes. "Did you think I wouldn't? People have left before." "Not me," he said simply. "Not unless you ask me to go." In that moment, with the summer sun warming her face and Isaiah standing before her tired but triumphant, Grace realized she never wanted him to leave. The thought should have frightened her, but instead, it felt right, natural as the changing seasons. "I think," she said carefully, "that we have work to do with these horses." Isaiah's smile deepened, as if he understood all she wasn't saying. "Yes, madam, that we do." Over the next weeks, they settled into new routines. The healthy cattle were sold to Campbell, providing immediate funds for the bank payment. Isaiah began working with the horses, revealing an exceptional talent for training that even impressed Campbell when he visited again to check on their progress. Grace learned about horse breeding from books Isaiah procured from town and from his patient instruction. The diseased cattle eventually recovered or were culled, and by late July, the immediate financial crisis had passed. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness, Grace broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "Fall will be here before we know it," she said casually. Isaiah nodded, understanding her reference to his original promise to stay only until autumn. "That it will. The horse business seems promising." "Very promising," he agreed. "You've got good grazing land, access to water, and shelter from the worst winter storms, perfect for breeding stock." Grace took a deep breath. "It would take at least a few years to establish a reputation for quality horses." 3 years, minimum, Isaiah confirmed. "Maybe 5 to really see profit." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. "When you came here," Grace finally said, "you mentioned moving on come fall." Isaiah turned to look at her directly. "That was the agreement." "Agreements can change," she ventured, her heart hammering in her chest. "Circumstances change." "They certainly do." His voice had softened. "I've been thinking," Grace continued, forcing herself to maintain eye contact despite the vulnerability she felt. "This ranch is too big for one person. It always was. Robert knew it, but we were too stubborn to hire help. And now I know better." She swallowed hard. "I'd like to propose a partnership, equal shares in whatever we build here." Isaiah's expression remained careful, neutral. "A business partnership," Grace gathered her courage. "Perhaps more than that, in time." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "In time," he repeated, the words carrying weight and promise. "I'd like that very much, Grace." He reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. The simple contact sent warmth spreading through her entire body. "Then it's settled," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Partners?" Isaiah's fingers tightened around hers. "Partners," he agreed. As summer gave way to fall, their partnership flourished, both the business and the carefully growing personal connection between them. The ranch transformed gradually, with new corrals for the horses and modifications to the barn. They sold 3 of the trained horses at the fall market for an excellent profit, confirming their new direction was sound. Their first kiss came on a crisp October evening. Grace had been mending a bridle by lamplight when Isaiah returned from checking the property boundaries. His face was wind-burned, his eyes bright with exertion and the cold air. "Storm coming," he announced, hanging his coat by the door. "First snow, maybe." Grace set aside her work and poured him a cup of hot coffee. Their fingers brushed as she handed him the cup, and instead of pulling away, Isaiah gently captured her hand. "Grace," he said softly, setting the coffee aside untouched, "there's something I've been wanting to say." She looked up at him, suddenly breathless. "Yes. When I rode up to your door 6 months ago, I was just looking for honest work, a place to be useful." His eyes held hers steadily. "I never expected to find a home, or someone who would come to mean so much to me." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Isaiah, you don't have to say anything," he rushed on. "I know it might be too soon after losing your husband. I know I might not be what you pictured for your future. But I need you to know that I." Grace rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, silencing his words. The kiss was tentative at first, a gentle question. When Isaiah's arms came around her, drawing her closer, the kiss deepened into an answer clear and certain. When they finally drew apart, both slightly breathless, Isaiah rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Grace Jennings. Have for months now." Tears pricked at Grace's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "It frightened me at first feeling this way again, but not anymore." That night, as the first snowflakes began to fall, they sat together by the fire and talked of the future, their future. Isaiah spoke of expanding the horse breeding operation, of building additional corrals come spring, of the possibility of hiring help as they grew. Grace shared her hopes of adding onto the cabin, making it truly theirs rather than a monument to what had been. "Robert would have liked you," she said as the fire burned low. "He always said I deserved someone steady, someone who would see me for who I am." Isaiah pressed a kiss to her temple. "He sounds like a wise man." "He was, and he would want me to be happy." She turned to face Isaiah fully. "You make me happy." Winter settled over the ranch, blanketing the land in white. Isaiah moved from the bunkhouse to the cabin, a decision that raised a few eyebrows in town but felt entirely right to both of them. They worked side by side through the short days and long nights, their partnership deepening with shared struggles and simple joys. In January, during a particularly fierce blizzard that kept them housebound for 3 days, Isaiah proposed properly. No ring, just honest words spoken by firelight. "I want to build a life with you, Grace. Not just as business partners, but as husband and wife, if you'll have me." Grace's answer was immediate and certain. Yes. 1,000 times yes. They were married in April 1878, exactly 1 year after Isaiah had first arrived at her door. The ceremony was small, just a few neighboring ranchers, Mr. Campbell and his family, and the pastor from town, but filled with genuine joy and celebration. That evening, as the last guests departed, and they stood together on the porch of their home, Grace leaned into Isaiah's embrace. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Walker?" he asked, his voice warm against her hair. Grace smiled at her new name. "I was thinking about how close I came to turning you away that day, how differently everything might have gone. But you didn't," he reminded her. "You took a chance on a dusty cowboy with nothing but the clothes on his back. Best decision I ever made," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "You saved this ranch." Isaiah shook his head. "We saved it together, and we'll build it together, something to pass on someday." Grace's hand drifted to her stomach, where the faintest curve was just becoming noticeable. "Sooner than you might think." Isaiah's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Grace, are you saying?" She nodded, happiness bubbling up inside her. "Come November, there will be 3 of us." The joy that transformed Isaiah's face was something Grace knew she would remember for the rest of her days. He lifted her gently, spinning her in a circle before setting her carefully back on her feet. "A child," he whispered, reverently placing his hand over hers on her stomach. "Our child." "The first of many, I hope," Grace said. "This land deserves a family to love it. And this family," Isaiah promised, "will never want for love or protection as long as I draw breath." As night fell over the ranch they'd saved together, Grace and Isaiah Walker stood wrapped in each other's arms, watching stars appear one by one in the vast Montana sky. The path ahead would not always be easy. Frontier life guaranteed hardship alongside its blessings, but they would face whatever came together. The widow who once couldn't imagine surviving alone had found not just help but a true partner. The cowboy who had wandered without roots had found his home. And together, they had created something neither could have built alone, a future full of promise, a love strong enough to weather any storm. Over the years that followed, the Walker Ranch flourished. Their first child, a son they named Robert Isaiah, arrived in the autumn of 1878, followed by a daughter, Elizabeth, 2 years later. By 1883, their horse breeding operation had gained reputation throughout Montana territory, with buyers coming from as far as Denver to purchase their stock. They added onto the cabin twice, creating a proper home with room for their growing family. They hired hands to help with the expanding business. And through it all, the difficult years and the prosperous ones, Grace and Isaiah remained steadfastly devoted to each other and the dream they had built together. On warm summer evenings, they often sat together on the porch, watching their children play in the yard that had once seemed so empty and full of ghosts. Sometimes, Grace would think back to that desperate moment by the creek, when she had whispered that she couldn't do it alone, and how Isaiah's simple, profound response had changed everything. "Then you ain't alone no more." And she never was again.